Ngā mihi nui ki koutou, hei uri hau no Ngāti Pīkeo mei Tainui, ko te mihi ki te mana whenua o te rohi nei. Ko John Reid toko ingoa, tēnei tātou katoa. So I'm not part of the same group of research programs that have just been spoken about. My work was, this project was completed about 2, maybe 3 years ago. And it was conducted by myself and Jason Mika from Waikato University, and we had a team of us. But what we were looking at was around Māori agribusiness and the key ingredients for success amongst those landowners. So the initial phase of this project is we spoke with 16 Māori trustees and directors of 16 Māori land trusts and corporations. These were from these, well, the general story of these trusts and corporations was they'd gone through a journey where they had maybe going from a position of a landlocked block that wasn't doing very well from an environmental or economic position, all the way through to where they've steered that organisation through to the other end of the spectrum where they've got sort of a thriving enterprise going. And so we sat down and we talked with them and we're asking them, well, what were your key ingredients for your success? And I'm just going to talk through those ingredients. I've got quite a few numbers in this presentation. You know, everyone wants numbers right at the end before we stop. But anyway, bear with me for that. But so we just had, there's 5 kind of key ingredients that popped up. Matato, access to skills and knowledge. I mean, pretty obvious really, to support good governance, management and operations, to address specific and technical kind of issues. So that was a core issue. Access to finance and working capital was a big issue. To invest in farm development, product development, marketing, sales, provide working capital, things like that to operate. Whakatairanga, which is pathways to market, trying to get your products from a position of where you're just providing a commodity through to providing something that's higher value, targeting or moving into a premium market. And whakawhanaungatanga, the networks, relationships and trust, these sort of all the connections you need to be successful, which we've just heard about for the last 3 presentations, all the emphasis on the networking and connections to get the momentum for change. Finally, the regulatory environment. You know, you need a supportive regulatory environment, or you need to know how to work within that regulatory environment. So those are sort of those 5 things came together. If you had those 5 things, then it was more likely to be heading in the direction you wanted to head. So we then did a quantitative survey. We sent out 100, got 36 back. So these numbers aren't like on the, you know, you're not going to hang your hat on it from a statistical position, but a pilot sort of study to give you some ideas, some numbers, some thinking, to help us think about these issues. And so we wanted to know the level of access these Māori land trusts and corporations had to these key ingredients, these enablers. So what did we find? So access to skills and knowledge. So this is a large issue for most Māori land trusts and corporations, having difficulty in accessing skilled employees. Around 70% of people found a real issue with that. That's an issue, I suppose, more broadly across the agricultural sector. Those who had little difficulty, very few, and if they were closer to bigger urban areas and so forth, so they had better access to skills. Accessing skilled governance, so governance was a big issue on the boards of the trusts and corporations. So, you know, extreme extent and moderate extent, so nearly over 60% there had an issue just getting the people they wanted onto their governing boards to make the good decisions to operate. Matato, dependency on another thing around capabilities was this high dependency on consultants. So wanting to get off the sense of being dependent on consultants, either to provide farm advice or on their boards. That was either extreme extent or moderate extent. Around over 50% talking about this being a major issue, and not having enough self-determination and relying on your own people to get to where you want to get. Money, access to financial capital, Surprisingly, this wasn't that high. Most didn't have too much of an issue finding access to financial capital. Used to be in the past, they were talking about, but it's getting easier to access financials. But where it was difficult to get money was if you're trying to do something environmental, some sort of ecosystem restoration work or something like that. More difficult to access financing for environmental shifts or changes. Easier to get it for if you're making changes or investments in your operations. Paths to market. So what we see here, 90% of Māori land trusts and corporations providing all their product directly to a processor that they have no control over where their products went. So a lot of feedback was, oh, we're producing this awesome product, we're following our values around environment and so on, but our product goes in with all the rest into the processors with those who don't follow the same kind of environmental stewardship and kaitiaki priorities that we have. And so there was this desire to move from being price takers to price makers through to premium product and direct to market type initiatives. And finally, around good governance and so forth. So, which really stood out, really strong importance of good, strong leadership was either important or very important for 90%, 95% of everyone responding to the survey, and the importance of good governance, once again, extremely important or very important, kind of things that people are probably already know these are important things, but just standing out as important. Trust and social cohesion, whakawhanangatanga, the networks, the relationships and connections. And so we're looking at also things around board dynamics and so forth. So power dynamics is posing a problem to making up good decisions, the connections and warmth of connection between trustees and governors. So that was sitting around 50%, talking about it being either an extreme issue or a moderate issue. So once again, something that needs to be worked through around conflict resolution, those sort of issues to deal with that type of problem. Consensus making being a problem. What's funny was there's saying here there's quite strong power dynamics on the boards, but they're also reporting that consensus making wasn't too much of a problem. So obviously there's a lot of tensions going on, but then consensus decisions get made and directions arrived at. And finally, the regulatory environment. So regulations being a major constraint on the direction you're heading. Feedback was no, generally. So there's sort of over 90%, which surprised us. We were thinking that it'd be far more of a constraint with the Te Ture Whenua Māori Act and the kind of constraints that imposes, but also the RMA. But those two did stand out as being constraints, but not overwhelming constraints to change. So what really stood out overall was the capability issues. Getting hold of the capability you need was pretty much the number one, and trying to get a pathway to market. So those sort of things stood out. But what we get is the enablers of success, just to highlight them again. Access to capabilities, access to finance, access to premium markets, access to networks, and access to a supportive regulatory environment. And if we look at it, it starts to look something like this, where you have a continuum of Māori agribusinesses and corporations that exist along a continuum, from those who are really struggling at one end to those that are thriving at the other end. You've got your post-settlement iwi corporations and some corporations doing incredibly well. But what they do is they're split over that area, and what you need is different interventions for different Māori land trusts and corporations depending where they sit across that spectrum. And so at one end, you might have the landlocked blocks that have no access, that are still under the Māori trustee, may not even know who owners are, all the way through to the other end of the scale. The other thing we looked at was the drivers. So that was just looking at what enables success. This is looking at the drivers. Once again, we did a bunch of interviews with Māori trustees and directors, and these are the main drivers. Why do you do what you do? And kaitiakitanga, of course, is one of the core drivers, so around the stewardship, sustainability, human environmental reciprocity, te autūtū, those sort of drivers. Whairawa, creating intergenerational wealth, another big driver. Of course, whanaungatanga, manaakitanga, positive relationships, and those sort of connections. Finally, mana whakahaere, quality leadership, management and governance. So these are what we're trying to do. This is the direction we're trying to head. And so we find, well, how important were these drivers? And you can see from when we took it to the survey, super important across all these areas. So these are the sort of main drivers propelling those organisations forward. And the enablers I covered earlier of how they think, how they go about heading in that direction. And so another thing we looked at was, what is the conflict or synergy between different drivers? So here we have, on the one hand, you might say, we might be heading in the environmental direction, kaitiakitanga being driven in that direction, or is that in conflict with making money? Whairawa. So what we did in our survey, we asked them, well, how well is your organisation going? Give us a +2 if you're going really awesome in an area, give us -2 if you're doing really poorly in an area. And that way we then got our survey results from that. But what we were able to do is look at it in this way was, do these drivers work in synergy or not? And here we have, on one hand, we've got profitability. So you can't see them because these organisations are scattered on this graph, but I've just made it simpler with a line. But what it showed is the correlation was that the more, basically the healthier and the higher the modi of the land, the more profitable the organisation. So what we find, they don't act in conflict, they work in synergy. And that's in that sense based on those surveys results. Same with, probably not surprisingly, the better your operations, the better your board, the better the management, the more profitable you are as well. So once again, those sort of things work in synergy. Overall, we arrived at the end of this research with this matrix. On the one hand, down the left-hand side, we've got the enablers, which I went through. Across the top, you've got the drivers, and then a range of actions that you take to achieve your goals, your drivers, and the enablers to achieve that. And this goes down to a lot more detail, and there's a website and stuff that sits and underpins it, and a website tool you can use. And if anyone is interested in this information and this study, there's a link here. All you can do is Google Ngāi Tahu Research Centre, University of Canterbury, Contemporary Division, and click, and then all the publications are there under the green. Thanks. So, kia ora.